It started on an ordinary Wednesday morning in late spring, when the mail arrived with an envelope that wasn't marked at all. No return address. Just her name, Elizabeth Carter, written in blocky, childlike letters. Elizabeth was 93 years old, sharp as ever but moving slow these days. She sat in her old rocking chair on the porch, the one James had fixed up last fall, and opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single photo. It was grainy but clear enough. It showed James, her only son, standing out in the north pasture, wearing his battered cowboy hat, leaning on the fence he'd spent half of last year mending. The photo was taken from far away with a long lens. Elizabeth studied it for a long time before she folded it back up, her jaw tight. James found her like that when he came back from checking the cattle. He climbed the steps, brushing dust from his jeans, and saw the envelope in her lap. "Ma?" She didn't say anything for a second, just handed him the photo. James was a big man, all shoulders and sunburned neck, with eyes like chipped granite. He looked at the picture and felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. He didn't cuss much in front of his mother, but this time he did. "Bastards," he muttered. Elizabeth didn't scold him. She was angry too. They'd heard rumors, of course. Folks talking in town about a development company sniffing around. Marin Property Development LLC, or sometimes just Marin. No one seemed to know much about them, except that they had big money behind them. Last year, Marin had bought up 2 old ranches on the other side of the highway and torn them down for some cookie-cutter subdivision. But the Carters' land wasn't for sale. It had been in the family for nearly 140 years. James always said he'd die before selling it. And Elizabeth? She'd buried her husband out back under the big cottonwood tree. She wasn't going anywhere. That envelope was their first warning shot. James tucked the photo in his back pocket and kissed his mother's forehead. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "They're not getting this place." He meant it, but the next day, a white SUV pulled up to the front gate around 10 a.m. James was out with the herd. He heard the rumble of tires on gravel and turned point. 2 men got out. They wore cheap polos with HOA inspection team screen printed on the chest in big, official-looking letters. James didn't even know there was an HOA around here. Because there wasn't. He whistled low to get the dog's attention and strode over to the fence. "Can I help you?" he called. Point one of them, a slim man with sunglasses and a clipboard, tried to look officious. "Sir, we're with the Edgewood Meadows Homeowners Association." James blinked at him. "Edgewood Meadows is 8 miles east. This isn't part of your subdivision." The man with the clipboard sniffed. "Your property is within our jurisdiction under annexation guidelines approved last year." James squinted. "No, it's not. Sir, we're here for a compliance inspection. You've been cited for code violations." James folded his arms. "You got a warrant?" They both hesitated. The second man, older, heavy-set, shifted uneasily. "Don't need one," the first guy said finally. "HOA bylaws allow inspection of non-compliant properties." James almost laughed. "Get the hell off my fence." They didn't move. He whistled again. The dogs came loping over, big mutts with too much energy and not enough training, but they were good at one thing, making people think twice about trespassing. The clipboard man glanced at them and backed up half a step. James grinned. "Mean. Now!" They turned, muttering, and got back in their SUV. James watched them bump back down the dirt road. He didn't relax until they were gone. When he got back to the house, he told Elizabeth. She just nodded. "Told you they'd try something," she said. That night, James sat at the kitchen table, the old wood scarred from decades of meals and arguments and card games. He spread out the property deeds. His father's name. His name. Land patents, county maps, every scrap of paper that proved this land was theirs. He organized them into folders. The next morning, he went to town to see his lawyer. Maria Lopez was tough, sharp as barbed wire, and didn't scare easy. James explained everything, the envelope, the men, the HOA claim. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she sighed. Marin. He frowned. You know them? She nodded. They'd been trying to build a case for forced annexations. They bribed local officials to get these annexation votes that aren't valid. They slap fake HOA rules on people, scare them into selling or paying fines. James felt his stomach turn. So they're crooks. They're worse, Maria said. They're professionals. She tapped the folders he brought. This is good. You keep every paper, every letter. Record them if they come back. Don't ever let them on your property. James nodded grimly. On his way out, Maria put a hand on his arm. I mean it, James. Be careful. They don't always stay polite. She was right. 2 days later they came back, 3 cars this time. James was in the barn. He heard tires crunch and dogs barking. When he came out, there were 6 men on his land. They wore bright orange vests this time marked Property Code Enforcement. One had a camera, recording everything. James didn't bother with pleasantries. You're trespassing, he said flatly. The leader, a big guy with a buzz cut and mirrored shades, smiled slow. We're here for an inspection. You're in violation of health and safety codes. Elizabeth was watching from the porch. Her hands were tied around her cane. James moved to block their path. You got a court order? Don't need one. You're leaving. Buzzcut's smile faded. Sir, you need to calm down. James shook his head slowly. This is my land. You're leaving. Buzzcut glanced at the cameraman. Document his aggression. James stepped closer. The man's hand twitched toward his belt. James saw the handle of a baton. Elizabeth's voice cracked across the yard like a whip. James! He turned. She was standing, ramrod straight despite the years. Don't give them what they want. James took a breath. Then another. He backed up a step, never looking away from Buzzcut. You're trespassing, he said again, quieter now. Last warning. Buzzcut sneered. Your HOA dues are 6 months overdue, old man. Pay up or we'll fine you daily. Elizabeth barked a laugh. We've never paid a cent to any HOA. Never will. Buzzcut's face darkened. Fine. Expect a lien notice. They turned and left. James waited until they were gone before he let out a long, shuddering breath. Elizabeth sat back down, but her face was pale. They'll be back, she said. James nodded once. Let them come. That night, he locked every gate. He loaded his old shotgun and set it by the door. He sat up until dawn, listening to the wind. The next morning, a county code officer drove up alone. He was polite, if nervous. James walked out to meet him at the fence. Morning, the officer said, clearing his throat. Morning. The officer looked at his clipboard. You're Mr. Carter? Yep. I got a report of livestock overpopulation, unsanitary conditions, and unlicensed structures. James lifted an eyebrow. Who reported it? The man coughed. It's an anonymous tip. James didn't say anything. He just stood there. The officer looked embarrassed. Mind if I take a look? James shook his head. Yeah, I do mind. Private property. The officer swallowed. Mr. Carter, I'm just trying to do my job. James shrugged. Then do it somewhere else. Got any legal authority? Silence. Didn't think so. The officer shifted from foot to foot. Finally, he sighed. Have a good day, Mr. Carter. He left. Elizabeth watched the whole thing from the window. When James came back inside, she patted his arm. That's your father's son, she said quietly. James felt a lump in his throat. He didn't say anything. He just kissed her cheek. But that was only the beginning. They thought maybe it was over for a while. A couple days passed with no cars on the gravel, no men in vests. James felt the tension in his shoulders ease up a little. Elizabeth didn't relax, though. She was old, but she wasn't naive. She'd lived through the Depression, the war, the droughts that nearly killed the ranch. She knew when something was just starting. James tried to distract himself with work. He replaced some rotten fence posts down by the creek and checked the herd twice a day, but even out there in the fields, he kept scanning the horizon. Then came the letter. It was certified mail, delivered right to the door by a nervous mailman who avoided James's eyes. James signed for it in silence, then shut the door gently. Elizabeth sat at the table watching him. "Well?" she asked. He broke the seal and read it out loud. It was from something called Edgewood Meadows HOA Compliance Division. It accused them of repeated violations of community standards, including unauthorized livestock enclosures, non-standard fencing materials, and failure to pay association dues. The letter threatened fines of $500 a day, retroactive 6 months. If they didn't pay or comply, the letter claimed, the HOA reserved the right to place a lien on the property and begin annexation proceedings for community benefit. James read it twice, slower the second time. He didn't say anything when he finished. He folded the paper once, neatly, and placed it on the table. Elizabeth looked at him with those sharp old eyes. "Well?" she said again. James's jaw worked. "I'm going back to town." He left before she could say more. Maria Lopez didn't even wait for him to sit. "You got it?" He handed her the letter. She read it, snorted, and slapped it back down. "It's bullshit." James just looked at her. She sighed. "Marin's pulling the same stunt they did last year in Green Creek. They claim annexation, which the county never properly voted on, and Elizabeth was still at the table. She didn't ask what Maria said. She didn't have to. They just sat there, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago. James kept the shotgun by the door. He slept on the old couch in the living room, listening for engines on the road. It was a week later when they made their next move. James was checking fence lines when he heard the dogs go nuts. He ran back up the hill. Heart-pounding .3 SUVs idled just outside the gate. Men in vests and polos again. One of them had a bullhorn. James slowed to a walk. He didn't want them to see him running. He stood just inside the fence. The man with the bullhorn shouted like James was deaf. "Mr. Carter, you are in violation of community bylaws. We require immediate access to your property." James didn't say anything. He just watched. Another man held up a piece of paper, waving it theatrically. "This is a notice of lien intent and inspection order." James raised one eyebrow. "Signed by who?" he called. They didn't answer. He spat in the dirt. "Not a judge, I bet." That got them riled. The bullhorn man stepped forward, all puffed up. "You are obstructing a lawful inspection." James rested his arms on the top of the gate casually. "This is private property." The bullhorn man's face turned red. "You're resisting official authority." James smiled without warmth. "You boys are gonna want to leave." They didn't. They started trying to open the gate. James whistled. The dogs came tearing around the corner, barking and snarling. The men jumped back. James laughed. "Go on," he said softly. "Get." They cursed at him. They threatened legal action. James didn't care. He just watched them leave. But his hand shook for hours after. That night, he called Maria. She told him to get cameras. Real ones. He spent the next morning putting them up all over the property. Cheap, ugly things with blinking red lights. Obvious on purpose. Elizabeth watched him through the window. When he came back in, she put a cup of coffee in front of him. "You're your father's son," she said again. He tried to smile. But he was so damn tired. They didn't show up for nearly a week. James dared to hope maybe they'd given up. But he should have known better. He was out feeding the herd when he saw something flash in the sky. At first he thought it was a big bird, but it hovered, turned, hovered again. A drone. He watched it with flat fury. It circled twice, then buzzed away. He stormed back to the house. Elizabeth was on the porch. She'd seen it too. "They're getting bold," she said. James didn't answer. He went inside, pulled down the old 30-30 from over the mantel, and checked it. Elizabeth didn't say a word. That night, James couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch with the rifle across his knees. The dogs lay at his feet. Elizabeth finally cracked the door and looked at him. "Come to bed," she said. He shook his head. "I can't," she sighed. Then she came out and sat next to him, pulling a blanket around her thin shoulders. They sat in silence together until the sun rose. That was the day the county truck came. James was in the barn when Elizabeth called him. "James!" He ran outside. An official county vehicle was parked in front of the gate. A man in a county badge was talking to Elizabeth. James got there just in time to hear. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the zoning board has declared this a public nuisance property." Elizabeth looked like she'd been slapped. James stepped between them. "Say that again," he growled. The man took a nervous step back. "Sir, I'm just delivering notice. There's a hearing next month. If you don't resolve the violations, the county can seize the land for public use." James's eyes went cold. "On whose authority?" "Zoning board vote." James's voice was low and deadly. "I never got notified about any vote." The man swallowed. "I don't know about that. I'm just doing my job." James snatched the paper from his hand. He read it twice. It was official county letterhead, all right, but it was filled with lies. Unauthorized livestock. Unapproved structures. Contaminated water. Bullshit, every word. James crumpled it in his fist. "You tell whoever sent you they're gonna have to take this land over my cold body." The county guy nodded like he'd heard it before. "Good luck, sir." He got in his truck and drove away fast. Elizabeth sat down hard on the porch. James handed her the paper. She read it slowly. Her hand shook. Then she folded it carefully and handed it back. "Don't let them scare you," she whispered. James's jaw tightened. "They're gonna wish they'd never heard of the Carters." That night, he called Maria. She was furious. "They can't do this without proper notice and due process," she said. James told her about the drones, the fake HOA inspectors, the threats. Maria was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "James, it's time to go on offense." He didn't understand. She explained. He listened carefully. By the end, he was nodding. "I'm in," he said. Elizabeth listened too, quiet but attentive. When James hung up, she patted his arm. "You be careful," she said. He didn't answer. He was too busy planning. James didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table with the old deed spread out in front of him. The edges were yellowed, the ink faded but legible. Elizabeth drifted in and out of sleep in her chair across from him. Sometimes she'd wake and look at him, and he'd nod, like to say, "I'm still here." When dawn came, he made fresh coffee. Maria showed up at 8 sharp. She didn't bother knocking. She walked right in and dropped her briefcase on the table. "James," she said by way of greeting. Elizabeth raised her eyebrows, but didn't say anything. Maria pulled out papers. Maps. County records. Printouts of corporate registrations. "Look at this," she said. James leaned forward. She showed him how Marin Property Development LLC had changed names 3 times in 2 years. Same owners. Same tax ID. Same mailing address in a neighboring county. "Shell company," she said. "They buy land, rezone it, flip it to a developer." James's eyes narrowed. "They're trying to do it here." Maria nodded. Elizabeth snorted. "Over my dead body," she said. Maria smiled grimly. "That's what we're going to make sure doesn't happen." They spent the whole morning planning. Maria explained that the zoning board meeting was the key. "They're counting on you not showing up. If you don't fight it, they can say you consented." James's lips curled. "Oh, I'll be there." Maria also handed him an envelope. "Your father's land patent. Remember I told you to look for it?" James felt something shift in his chest. He took the paper with shaking hands. It was real. Signed, notarized, and recorded decades ago. James swallowed hard. He didn't cry, but it was close. Elizabeth reached over and squeezed his arm. "He knew they'd come someday," she said. James nodded. Maria said, This proves clear chain of title. If they try to claim you don't own this land, this kills it. James set his jaw. Good. Maria stood. I'll see you in court. She paused at the door. Be ready. They're going to get desperate. James just nodded. That afternoon, the black SUVs showed up again. 4 of them this time. James was in the yard with a hammer, fixing a broken fence board. He didn't even flinch. He set the hammer down carefully and wiped his hands on his jeans. The men piled out. Same corporate police look. Ballistic vests, radios, one with a clipboard. Mr. Carter? James didn't answer. The leader approached the gate. You're in violation of the Edgewood Meadows Association regulations. We are here to conduct a mandatory inspection. James leaned on the fence. No, you're not. The man bristled. You don't have a choice. James smiled. Sure I do. He reached behind him slowly and set his hand on the butt of his revolver. Didn't draw it, just rested there. The man looked at it. James saw the flicker of fear. I'm going to tell you once, James said softly. You cross that line, you're trespassing. And I'll arrest you myself. The men looked at each other. One of them stepped forward like he was going to be the hero. James didn't move. His thumb cocked the hammer back. The metallic click was very loud in the quiet. The man froze. James let the silence hang. Then he uncocked the revolver and holstered it. Get, he said. They got. He watched them go, every muscle tight. Elizabeth stood on the porch the whole time. She didn't say anything. When they were gone, James blew out a long breath. Elizabeth finally spoke. Your father would have been proud. James didn't answer. He wasn't sure about that. The next day was the zoning board meeting. James wore his only suit. It was old, tight in the shoulders, but it would do. Elizabeth insisted on coming. Maria picked them up in her dusty Ford Escape. Elizabeth rode shotgun. James sat in the back with the old deed and the land patent in his lap. Maria drove fast. Let them try anything today, she said under her breath. The zoning board was in a cramped county building. A dozen folding chairs. A long table with microphones. 3 bored-looking officials. Marin's lawyer was there. Expensive suit. Shiny briefcase. He gave James a smug little smile when they walked in. James ignored him. Elizabeth gave him the stink eye. Maria leaned over and whispered, Play it cool. James didn't answer. The meeting was called to order. Marin's lawyer went first. He talked for 15 minutes about community standards, health code violations, public safety concerns. He made James's ranch sound like a toxic waste dump. James's jaw tightened with every word. Elizabeth laid a hand on his arm. When the lawyer sat down, the chairwoman of the board looked at James. Mr. Carter? James stood up. He wasn't much for speeches. He took out the old deed, the patent, held them up. This land's been in my family near 100 years. I got all the paperwork. I got all the rights. I don't owe your HOA a damn thing. And I'm not moving. He laid the papers on the table. Maria took over then. She was calm, precise. She laid out county records showing no lawful annexation had ever been filed. She showed photos of the fake inspectors trespassing. She played the security footage of them trying to force the gate. She presented the notarized land patent. The board was quiet. The lawyer tried to object. Maria shut him down, citing case law. The chairwoman cleared her throat. I think we've heard enough. They went into closed session for 10 minutes. James sat like a statue. Elizabeth just patted his arm. Maria looked confident. When the board came back, the chairwoman read their decision. All zoning complaints dismissed. No authority to enforce HOA regulations. Any attempt to lien the property would be unlawful. Case closed. James exhaled for the first time in what felt like months. Elizabeth wiped her eyes. Maria shook his hand hard. The lawyer for Marin didn't say a word. He packed up and slunk out. James helped Elizabeth to her feet. She was shaking a little, but she was smiling. Come on, he said. Let's go home. But it wasn't over. Not really. A week later, James got another letter. Different HOA name this time. Same threats. He crumpled it and threw it in the trash. 2 days after that, another drone. James shot that one clean out of the sky. Maria sent them a cease and desist letter so strong it practically caught fire. James put up a new fence with no trespassing signs every 20 feet. But he knew it wasn't going to stop them forever. These people were like weeds. You cut them down, they grew back somewhere else. So he made a decision. He took that court ruling, had it framed. He nailed it right to the front gate. And below it, he put up a sign in giant red letters. This land is not for sale. Not part of any HOA. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Elizabeth laughed the first time she saw it. That ought to do, she said. James just grunted. But he allowed himself a tiny smile. He also went to the sheriff personally, showed him everything, made sure they understood any more inspectors would be treated as trespassers and arrested. The sheriff, a big man who'd known James since high school, shook his hand. Understood, he said. They didn't see SUVs for a while after that. Oh, there were letters. Harassing calls. A sleazy real estate agent offering to help them move on. James told them all to pound sand. He was ready. They'd have to drag him and his mother out in chains. Elizabeth passed away quietly that winter. In her sleep. James found her in the morning, cold but peaceful. He sat with her a long time. Then he called Maria. They buried her on the hill behind the house. James built a little fence around it, put up a cross he carved himself. The grass grew back fast that spring. The cows grazed near the fence line, calm and fat. James kept the shotgun by the door. The camera stayed up. The sign stayed at the gate. Every so often a strange car would stop on the road, engine idling, watching. James would stand in the yard with a rifle in plain view. They always left. The harassment never really stopped. It just changed. Certified letters, notices, threats. But James learned to ignore them. He and Maria filed them all away, and slowly the developers moved on. They picked softer targets. People without old deeds and patents. People without lawyers. People who couldn't fight. James made sure everyone in town knew what had happened. He showed them the letters, the court ruling, the footage. He warned them. Some listened. Some sold cheap anyway. He couldn't save them all, but he saved his land. When he was old, he'd sit on the porch, watching the sun set over the hills. He'd think about Elizabeth, about his father. He'd run a hand over the old revolver on his lap and smile a little, because he knew one thing for damn sure. And no one was ever going to take this land from them. Carter's. Not while he drew breath.